Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. We're really delighted to be here on behalf of the National Aboriginal Capital Corporations Association to present our session on financing Indigenous growth through partnerships and youth leadership. My name is Magnolia Perron. I'm the Director of Strategy and Partnerships at NACCA. And for those of you who are unfamiliar, NACCA, we're a national network of over 50 Indigenous financial institutions, coast to coast to coast, across the country that provide First Nations, Métis, and Inuit entrepreneurs with access to capital. I'm thrilled to be joined by two incredible panelists who will bring their unique perspectives to today's conversation. So please join me in welcoming Chris Lefebvre, who is the co-founder and vice president and head of sales of Ojiibik, and a proud member of NACCA's Indigenous Youth Business Advisory Council, as well as Marissa Nobauer, the Director of Business Strategy Development at TELUS. Before we dive into today's topics, I'd love to pass it over to first you, Chris, and then Marissa, to introduce yourselves and share a little bit about the organizations you represent.
Sure, pleasure to be here, everybody. Chris Lefebvre. I'm originally from Ottawa First Nation. It's a community up in northeastern Ontario, part of Treaty 9. I'm the co-founder of Ojiibik, and I have a company called Bowadin Consulting.
Good afternoon. My name is Marissa Nobauer. I am the Director of Business Strategy Development at TELUS, which is actually a very generic name when I say it out loud. But for those of you in the crowd that maybe aren't from Canada, TELUS is a technology company based in Canada that provides advanced high-speed internet and wireless solutions that really can create change in the world. And so when you look at connectivity, we really look at how do we invest in products and solutions through healthcare, through agriculture, that can support the growth of our economy, but also our communities. It's a pleasure to be here today. And God, these lights are so bright. I feel like I'm like paparazzi taking photos.
So thanks, Chris. Thanks, Marissa, for being here. And thanks again to those in the audience. As I mentioned, today's discussion is about financing Indigenous growth, but equally it's about the power of partnerships and youth leadership and driving that growth forward. Indigenous people are the fastest and youngest growing demographic in our country, and Indigenous entrepreneurship and business development is on the rise. And youth in particular are making up a big portion of our population, and we're looking for ways to support them to find pathways to self-determination and prosperity. And we see business and entrepreneurship as a pathway for youth to find their passion, make change in their communities, and support not only the Indigenous economic development, but Canada's prosperity more widely. Yet barriers remain. We know there's limited access to capital, a lack of culturally relevant financial tools, and certification systems that don't reflect Indigenous realities. So the question is, what will it take to create a truly equitable and sustainable financing ecosystem that supports Indigenous-led innovation and community growth? The good news is that through partnerships between Indigenous financial institutions, through corporations, and through governments, we're beginning to close those gaps. So today we'll examine three key themes. One is how Indigenous youth are leading innovation and community impact, how corporate partners are aligning reconciliation goals with Indigenous economic priorities, and exploring financial models and collaborations that are proven effective in supporting sustainable Indigenous-led growth. So to dive into some of our questions, Chris, I'd love to start with you. As both a young entrepreneur and a NACCA Youth Council member, what trends and innovations are you seeing among Indigenous youth in business today?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I forgot to mention it at the start, but Ojiibik's a corporate furniture dealership. And for us, the trends that we see are really a lot of Indigenous businesses banding together. So we have a lot more access to each other than we've ever had in the past. And for example, with Ojiibik, we've been working with a number of different artists, different sort of furniture manufacturers that maybe aren't at the commercial grade. And we're able to work together and actually get them to the commercial grade where we're able to help sell their products in a corporate setting. So it really is about banding together and helping each other out. We've been really fortunate that way, that we've been able to meet and connect with Indigenous entrepreneurs all across the country.
Thanks, Chris. I think, Chris's company, Ojiibik, is just one of many of the young Indigenous businesses that NACCA supports through our network of Indigenous financial institutions, which are Indigenous-owned, community-based financial institutions that provide financing to Indigenous businesses. And we often see young people starting businesses in retail trade, construction, consulting, also in innovation and tech. So I'd love you to maybe explore a little bit more on the types of support systems, such as mentorship, capital, and training. And of those, what do you think makes the biggest difference in supporting youth?
For me personally, it was the mentorship side at the beginning, right? I've had a couple really great bosses in the past who have been able to support me and build up my confidence over time. And really, those are the folks that allowed me to leave my 9-to-5 job and start my entrepreneurial journey. So the mentorship was really critical for me. But you'll hear this over and over again, and this is a scenario for many Indigenous people and many Indigenous businesses. But it always comes down to access to capital is always going to be the biggest hurdle for us.
Thanks, Chris. And we're going to dive into that a little bit further around what sort of financing models and innovative ways are out there to support youth to increase their access to capital. But Marissa, let's turn it over to you. So TELUS has made youth leadership a visible priority, even including dedicated youth representative space on your Indigenous Advisory Council. So tell us why it's important for TELUS to bring Indigenous youth to the table.
Thank you. As I was listening to you two talk, I just realized that I am the elder on this panel, which is kind of terrifying. I actually just wanted to touch base on something Chris said, which is Indigenous businesses banding together to support each other. I think that it's such an important thing to talk about because you're in the Indigenous economy, you're creating an ecosystem of not competition, but working together to support each other's success. And I think that is such an important way in which we are melding together two different perspectives of both Indigenous worldviews and business, and how the two of them can come together, but that can also create successful economies and successful benefits for all of us. So I just wanted to double click on that. So, I mean, at the end of the day, I think every one of us in this room that are looking at, products and services that we need to sell, or we're looking at consumers that we need to create relationships with, or we're looking at a large demographic of individuals who are going to start leaving our workforce soon. We have a lot of risks in front of us, but we have a lot of opportunities in front of us. And I think the only way we can really address that is by starting to have conversations with those that are going to be coming in and supporting the success of our economies, our communities into the future. When we, as an organization, were building our reconciliation strategy, and for those in the audience that don't know, 10 years ago, the 94 calls to action came out in Canada. They were established by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which was established to bring truths forward about the impacts and about what happened at the residential school system here in Canada. The 94 calls to action said, this is the way that as a country we can move forward to reconcile. Call to action number 92 specifically said, this is the call to action for corporate Canada. You can make sure that your teams understand what our shared history is. You have to make sure that you're engaging and working with Indigenous people and working on their land. And lastly, you need to make sure that you're playing your role in advancing economic reconciliation. And so when we were building that strategy, we were engaging with leaders, elders, subject matter experts across the country. And we heard time and time again, well, what about the youth? They're the future. They're taking over. They're the carriers of our culture and tradition. You're moving into first and second generations of youth who have away from residential school, who are here and eager. And so we said, okay, well, what's the best way in which we can involve youth in our work? And so we said, we're going to have an Indigenous Advisory Council that guides what TELUS does. Business leaders from across the country that we meet with twice a year that can help TELUS in our journey. And we dedicated 2 specific spots on that council, Magnolia being one of them, to make sure that we have youth voices at the table. And it has been honestly, some of the most exciting conversations that happen in our Indigenous Advisory Council are when Magnolia and our counterparts are bringing forward things that the rest of us that don't know what Snapchat is, to help us really kind of go, oh, we were looking at this completely wrong. They're bringing forward great suggestions around how we can better embed reconciliation into our work, how we can better approach Indigenous entrepreneurs and Indigenous businesses because they're in this space. But what I really appreciate about having Indigenous youth at the table is get on with it already, right? Like, I remember when reconciliation wasn't a concept, and to be in this space now where it is constant conversation in corporate Canada, to have youth on the table to be like, this is great, stop talking, start acting, and how are you going to incorporate it in? It really motivates folks to action, and it's a really exciting time.
Yeah, thanks. I know at NACCA as well, we've developed a National Indigenous Business Advisory Council made up of 7 young Indigenous entrepreneurs from across the country. Chris is one of our youth council members, and we brought him on to help provide guidance and direction as we developed our Indigenous Youth Entrepreneurship Program that just launched earlier this spring across 30 of our Indigenous financial institutions. But it was really important for us, if we were going to design and develop programming for Indigenous youth, that it was informed by them so that it would make sense and work for their needs and address the barriers they're facing when trying to access capital. So let's come back to you, Chris, as a young Indigenous business owner. How are you seeing young Indigenous entrepreneurs balance traditional knowledge with modern business models to create meaningful community impact?
Yeah, I can only speak for myself, but through Ojiibik, we've found a really interesting niche where, like I mentioned, we're a corporate furniture dealership, but when we're in these spaces, a lot of the times, because they know we're a First Nation-owned business, they ask, hey, can you guys help us out with the art? And that has really been a great opportunity for us. So now we have a young woman named Emily Laurent Henderson on our staff. She's an Inuk woman, and she's formerly the curator for the McMichael Gallery. So she's our in-house curator and art advisor. So what she does is she actually works with our clients, our corporate clients, to identify their needs. If they're looking for specific artists from a specific region, she helps source them. And through that, we're sort of blending the needs of our corporate clients, but then providing opportunities for young Indigenous artists. And these are folks that maybe they don't, maybe they have a website, maybe they have an Instagram, but they're not in galleries, they're not represented. So we have the opportunity to use art as a way to raise individuals' profiles and actually show that art and that medium could be a viable career. So we've been really fortunate that way, where we've been able to blend sort of the traditional knowledge and the actual art that we've been doing for many, many years into a corporate setting, but not in a sort of tokenistic way, right? We're not just putting up medicine wheels everywhere. We're really working with artists and really defining sort of what they want to do and putting that into a corporate space, and it really helps out with the learning as well for a lot of these corporate clients that we have.
Can I just add to that? I think the placekeeping work that Chris is talking about, it doesn't just benefit entrepreneurs, it benefits businesses. So TELUS went through a process where we actually worked, we actually renovated our floor here in Toronto in one of our buildings, and we worked with Indigenous architects, Indigenous artists, Indigenous knowledge keepers to go, okay, how do we create a space that is reflective of those who lived here since time immemorial? And what we have created on that floor is orientation that faces due north, no matter due north, east, south, and west. No matter where you look, you can see the water, right? And it's created a space that team members want to work in. They want to come into the office and work in this space. They want to sit in the longhouse that we've created in there because it feels conducive to working together, right? So I think the great thing about this work is that it benefits everybody. At the end of the day, you're supporting Indigenous artists, you're supporting Indigenous businesses, you're supporting learning, but at the same time, you're having team members that want to work in these spaces because they feel inspired, because it harkens back to a different way of sitting in an office than we're traditionally used to.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And I've been in the TELUS Toronto head office, and it is a beautiful space. So thanks for sharing that. And I think that's what I love about working with Indigenous businesses, that you see they're often creating employment opportunities in their community. They're hiring other community members. There's a focus on hiring Indigenous youth and giving back to the community. There's often, an environmental or social impact part of their business that they're contributing to the overall well-being. I'd love to come back to you, Marissa, to hear a little bit more around some of the other work TELUS is doing to support Indigenous youth, specifically through maybe some of the bursaries or co-op programs you run.
Yeah, so I think I'm going to talk about it in terms of Magnolia talked about at the beginning. Indigenous entrepreneurs are the fastest growing group in this country today. Indigenous youth are the fastest growing demographic in the country. We all know that there is going to be a gap in resources coming into our companies in the next couple of years as people start retiring. And as corporations, as organizations, we need to make sure that we're getting ahead of that. And so from an organizational perspective, I'll kind of look at it in a couple of different ways. One is we're really focusing on, we've built an Indigenous employment strategy. How do we support Indigenous students coming out of universities and coming into the job space to know that TELUS is a good place to work? It's a good place to work from a cultural perspective, from a respect perspective, from a career growth perspective. It's really, really important that they come and work for TELUS as opposed to somebody else, right? Because I want those ideas. I want that fresh diversity in the organization. I want people to come. So that's part of what we've been doing is how do we build that pipeline of talent? It starts with an Indigenous employment strategy. We've created a specific Indigenous retention strategy, making sure that when people come into the organization, they don't cycle out in a year. Because I think when you look at most organizations right now, the retention rate for Indigenous people tends to be lower. So really focusing on that. The other thing that we're doing is how do you create a pipeline directly from universities? So there's two ways in which we're looking at that. One is we've partnered with Inspire, which is a national Indigenous organization that funds scholarships to provide funding specifically to support Indigenous students who are looking to grow their careers. And we really are focusing on students that are looking to grow their careers in areas that create benefit for all of us. So whether it's in the health space, the agriculture space, the environmental space. And then the other thing that we've been doing is how do we create specific co-op fellowship positions so those students can then come in and learn what it is to work in an organization. So we have two specific positions out right now. Actually, we have an Indigenous co-op student specifically supporting in our security team. And then we've actually just posted for an Indigenous co-op student to support in how do we integrate Indigenous perspectives into our data ethics strategy, into a responsible AI strategy. And so really excited to see those pipelines coming in through the universities that we've built relationships with.
Thanks, Marissa. So let's switch gears a little bit. Let's talk about partnerships. They're critical to creating change within our systems, and we're talking about partnerships between communities, governments, investors, and corporations. Chris, your company, you have a consulting company, Bawadin, that specializes in building strong partnerships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous organizations. So can you tell us what you've learned about how to lead these relationships, and where do you see the greatest opportunity for collaboration right now?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So I'll take it back a little bit. Formerly, I used to work for the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. So they're the treaty rights holders to the land that you guys are on right now. And I was the head of business development for them. And it was only 5 years ago when we really couldn't get a meeting with, a lot of corporate Canada. So the idea that, Indigenous participation has shifted and changed so much in the last 5 years is incredible. But now that we're at the table and we have an opportunity to get in front of, corporate Canada and they're interested in working with Indigenous businesses and Indigenous communities, the next step really is, around procurement. So when people talk about what does a partnership mean, the one thing that I always say, and it jumps out immediately, is when an organization wants to sort of walk the walk, it typically comes down to having some sort of public, procurement target. What are you guys willing to spend, and what are you guys willing to make public? So as soon as there's a little bit of shareholder pressure, it's amazing what these companies can do when there's, all of a sudden there's a bit of shareholder pressure, and they're the most creative, innovative companies you'd ever see, right? Because now that they have the goals out there, they're not going to go backwards on them. So the power of sort of putting that public procurement spend is really powerful. And I think a lot of Indigenous communities and Indigenous-owned businesses see that. And then we're able to work in a lot more collaborative way because we each have goals that we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, thanks. Procurement's an interesting topic, and that's probably a good segue to a question I had for you, Marissa, around, how is TELUS and how can corporate partners more broadly open doors to new markets, investment, or procurement opportunities for Indigenous-owned businesses?
So I was in a panel a couple weeks ago with Bill Lomax, who's the CEO of the First Nations Bank of Canada. And one of the things that he talked about, and I'm crediting him in case anybody goes back to him, is he's talking about the missing middle. So right now, there's a big conversation in Canada around critical resource extraction, LNG, the LNG race, pipelines, and we're talking about these big, massive projects and Indigenous participation and equity in these projects, which is very important. But what we're not talking about is all of those procurements that are going to create the success of those projects. It's those businesses that are going to be supporting those projects that we really need to be thinking about and focusing on, because those projects are going to affect a certain number of First Nations, but not all of them, whereas procurement has the ability to affect a majority of communities across this country who don't have critical minerals in their backyard. And so I think it's really important as organizations to be thinking about, you have the power to procure. At the end of the day, every single one of us in a corporate environment has the power to procure from Indigenous businesses. And there are so many great Indigenous businesses out there. And I actually agree with Chris. Targets are super important. At TELUS, we have a reconciliation action plan. It's public. I report on it annually. We're held to task for it. And I think it's really important to hold ourselves accountable. But I think at the other end of it is Indigenous businesses have access to capital that non-Indigenous businesses don't. Indigenous businesses have access to different loans that non-Indigenous organizations don't. It's really smart business to be working with Indigenous governments, to be working with Indigenous companies to help advance your needs. And I guarantee you, doesn't matter what your need is in this room. If you go into Google or Yahoo or whatever search engine I'm allowed to talk about with sponsors right now, and you put in a business that you're looking for, an Indigenous business, you will find one. The growth is astonishing. The businesses are there. And I'll give you an example. We had a company that was looking to grow, but in order to grow, they needed some guaranteed long-term revenue. And so we partnered with them and provided a guaranteed 4-year partnership to allow them to grow. They went from 1 truck to 12 trucks in the course of 4 years and working with a number of different clients because we could provide them with that continuity. So yes, it's about the dollars, but it's also about the continuity and the support. Can you support for a certain period of time to help that company get up off the ground and bring in other clients?
It's a really good point. And I know for NACCA, a big focus for us is the procurement and supporting the establishment of the First Nations Procurement Authority. That's going to help both private and public and government in their procurement efforts. The federal government has the 5% set aside for federal procurement opportunities. And we know a lot of corporations like TELUS are looking for Indigenous businesses. NACCA, along with 4 other national Indigenous organizations, have supported the establishment of this First Nations Procurement Authority. That's going to help with developing databases of Indigenous businesses, helping with the certification and verifying Indigenous businesses, and the training and capacity piece that'll go into it. So it's a really important area. Let's talk a little bit more. So, we've mentioned that, TELUS has an Indigenous Reconciliation Action Plan. It's actually the first publicly traded company and telecommunications company to have an Indigenous Reconciliation Action Plan. So can you tell us a little bit more about what sort of approaches or principles you take with building partnerships with Indigenous communities and Indigenous governments?
I can, and I should actually just say, we were talking about indigenous entrepreneurs. You have one right here who has 2 businesses and who has actually just told me backstage that he started Ojiibik last year, and this year is 12 employees and $5 million of sales. So, I mean, the future, the opportunities are here. Sorry, what was my question? About partnerships, right?
That's right.
Thank you for that.
How do we do partnerships? Okay, at the end of the day, you don't get married without having several dates. You don't get married without getting to know somebody, building a relationship, understanding how you both think about, early mornings or late nights. Relationships are fundamentally based in getting to know one another, building trust, understanding where the person comes from, understanding their family. It's no different than working with Indigenous communities. At the end of the day, it is about building trust and building relationships based on trust. And I don't know if I'm allowed to swear in here, but I just kind of have a don't be an asshole policy. At the end of the day, you are going to go, you're going to have a conversation. You're going to make so many mistakes. It's not about the mistakes that you're making. It's about how you recover from the mistakes. It's about when an Indigenous community says something is wrong or to approach it differently. You don't go, well, that's the way I do it. You sit down, you listen, and you think about how you approach it. And I'll give you a really cool example. So TELUS has been working with the NACCA Nation, which is the first modern treaty First Nation in British Columbia, which is the far west side of the country, and they're based up in the far northwest of the country. And so modern treaty means they have sovereign rights to their land. And for NACCA, what was really important is that they wanted to build they wanted a wireless network in their community. They wanted self-service in their community, but they wanted to own the assets. It was really important for them from a sovereignty perspective. So we sat down together over 18 months to really understand what were NACCA's goals, what did they want to achieve, what could TELUS do, how could TELUS support, and we ended up working together to create a project where NACCA actually owns the infrastructure, so they own the towers in the community, and TELUS has trained them on how to maintain that infrastructure and also bring net new carriers onto that infrastructure. And so, but in order to do that, and it was the first of its kind, TELUS had never done that before. In order to do that, we needed to sit down, we needed to understand each other, we needed to understand what their goals were. So it took time, but at the end of the day, NACCA now has connectivity, wireless connectivity throughout their 4 villages, throughout their highway coverage, and they own that infrastructure and they're maintaining it, which was super important to them.
Thanks, Marissa. Really, really appreciate that example. Let's switch gears a little bit and get into sort of our third theme, which was really around financing. So I touched on that NACCA has an Indigenous youth entrepreneurship program that we launched. We also have an Indigenous women entrepreneurship program. These are financial products that are supporting smaller micro businesses. We've actually capitalized with support from the federal government, a micro loan fund to support women and youth to access microloans up to $25,000. So really supporting those with maybe home-based or part-time businesses. We see a lot of artisans come through the program, which I know we talked about artists earlier. But then on the flip side, we also have our Indigenous Growth Fund, which is an investment grade social finance fund that was supported by NACCA and supported by some of the crown corporations across the country. It's $153 million fund that's raising private and institutional investors so that we're bringing more capital into our network so that we can support more businesses in accessing loans through our network of Indigenous financial institutions. So those are some of the ways that NACCA's looking to create new innovative solutions to support Indigenous business development in Canada. I'm wondering, Chris, maybe you can speak to, as an Indigenous business, a young entrepreneur, what kind of financing models and frameworks have been most effective for you as an entrepreneur starting and growing your business?
Yeah, sure. So I think just to start, when people talk about Indigenous business and the opportunities out there, they're endless. But really, the opportunity for capital isn't as easy as a lot of people say it is. But the good thing is that NACCA exists, and so does the Indigenous financial institutions. So for me, having an IFI, Two Rivers was the one that I went through, which is the one based out in Six Nations, to have their support at the start of my business was critical, right? They were able to give us our first bit of capital, and really that was helpful to kick us off. Like without the support of the IFI, we wouldn't have been able to grow. We wouldn't have been able to even really get started. And not only was it the capital, but it was more the support through like the entire NACCA organization and some of the different IFIs across the country. If Two Rivers wasn't able to help me, they were more than happy to put me in touch with another group in Northern Ontario, or I think we even worked with one that was out west. So the entire group of IFIs are really sort of, again, similar theme to the first question, but about banding together, right? The opportunity to help Indigenous youth get the capital that they need is, sort of an entire network of people looking out for you. So it's not just the one network. So I'd say the IFI network has been great for me personally. And there's a number of other opportunities out there, but really we needed to have that proof of concept. Ojiibik's relatively new still, so we weren't able to go to the banks quite yet. And to have NACCA and to have some of the IFIs help us out and give us that first tranche of cash really, saved the company, to be real.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. And just to clarify for the folks in the room, an IFI is an Indigenous financial institution. There's over 50 of them that NACCA represents. And that's why we were established over 35 years ago to fill that gap where Indigenous businesses couldn't go to mainstream financial institutions to get a loan because of restrictions with operating a business on reserve, for example, and many, many other systemic issues that still exist today. So Marissa, TELUS also supports small and medium-sized enterprises. Can you talk maybe specifically about the TELUS Pollinator Fund for Good and how that's supporting Indigenous businesses?
I can. I quickly want to mention, the Indigenous economy is worth $56 billion. I think that's the current stat that I recently read. That's $56 billion. Like, it is a massive, massive economy and opportunity space here in Canada. So what is the TELUS Pollinator Fund for Good? So the TELUS Pollinator Fund for Good is a investment fund that was specifically established to support companies and founders that are looking to do good, that are looking to build businesses that drive change in our society. Again, whether it's from a health ingenuity perspective, a tech ingenuity perspective, agriculture, they're really looking at investing in those types of businesses, as well as businesses from underrepresented founders. And so it's a $100 million fund that has been invested in some really cool businesses. And so just to talk about a couple of them. So one of the businesses is a oh my goodness, Bobby Rissette's company, Virtual Gurus. Thank you, it came to me. So Virtual Gurus is started by Bobby Rissette, which is a company that was specifically focused on, not everybody needs a full-time EA or full-time admin staff, but they need staff behind the scenes to help them on a part-time basis. On the flip side, you have a market of single moms that can only work part-time, other underrepresented groups that maybe didn't have the capacity to have a full-time job because of other responsibilities. And so Bobby essentially saw a market where she goes, we can provide these virtual gurus, these virtual support systems by working with Indigenous women and mothers and other groups that maybe don't have access to full-time jobs. And so she's brought together these two things, which has created employment opportunities and community while also providing a business need. So that's one of the really cool organizations that the Pollinator Fund has funded.
Thanks. And we love Bobby. She's actually the chair of the Indigenous Prosperity Foundation, an organization that NACCA helped establish that launched a couple of years ago. And it's raising philanthropic funds to support early stage women and youth entrepreneurs across the country with a focus on financial literacy, digital literacy, as well as seed grants. So also sort of touching on some of the financial options that are out there to support Indigenous businesses. So I know we're getting short on time. It's the end of the day. Folks are tired. So maybe I'll just ask you one sort of final question before we wrap out. And that would be, what's one recommendation that you would give the policymakers or the business leaders in the room today to support Indigenous-led growth?
Look, at the end of the day, it's not difficult. TELUS is a massive bureaucratic corporation full of lots of spans and layers, and we managed to embed, or we are embedding reconciliation into our business. You have to start somewhere, and so I recommend that you start by going, what are the intersection points between what your business does and what reconciliation is in Canada, and how can you support? And there's amazing organizations. Chris has an organization that specifically supports corporations to do this work. And sit down and go, where can I support? Where's there benefit to both community and my business? Because I guarantee you there is. And just one other thought. Canada wants to hit net zero by 2050? I think that's our goal. One of the banks, and I'm sorry, I can't remember which one, came out the other day to say that in order to do that, it's going to be $2 trillion. $2 trillion to hit that mark. All of those projects that are going to support clean energy in Canada are going to be on Indigenous territories in this country. The opportunity that we have is now, and it is so vast, we can't not take advantage of it.
I think for me, I'm going to sound a bit like a broken record again, but it really just comes down to putting public targets. It's the easiest way for organizations to really put their foot down and make a difference. There's that aspect of it, but the other thing that I want to mention too is now that reconciliation is, a word that everybody knows or everybody should know, and you hear it all the time, and not everyone understands what it means. But take, for example, in Toronto, right? There's billions, like hundreds of billions of dollars worth of projects going on. There's one treaty rights holder, it's Mississaugas of the Credit. There's a number of communities around, but the amount of consultation, the amount of interest, the amount of outreach to those nations is overwhelming. So if you're thinking about it from a business perspective, you really want to take time and approach these communities in a really thoughtful way, because when I was working there, we would have people reach out all the time and say, hey, we want to have a meeting. I said, okay, great. What do you guys want to talk about? Well, and they say, we want to have a relationship. And we're just like, what does that mean, right? So I really would caution, businesses to think more critically about what their relationship is that they're looking for, and sort of what's the give and take or the benefit to each side of the partnership.
Thanks, Marissa. Thank you, Chris. Thank you both for your insightful reflections today. Just to wrap up, I think what we've heard today reinforces that Indigenous youth are not just the future of entrepreneurship, but they're driving it today. And Chris, you're a great example of that. Corporate partners like TELUS are showing that partnerships are built on trust, reciprocity, and shared values, and those can unlock real opportunities for economic reconciliation. And financing models that are flexible, Indigenous-led, and community-driven are key to sustaining that growth. So at NACCA every day, we see that when Indigenous entrepreneurs are given the right tools, they're able to succeed, and they're not just building businesses, but they're building stronger communities. And so as we move forward, our challenge is to build on these examples that were shared in the room today, to connect capital, youth, and partnership in a way that transforms reconciliation into shared economic success. So thank you all for being here. I wish you a wonderful rest of your evening and a great conference over the next couple of days. And take care for now. Nawagoa.